So here is the because this UI stuff will be kind of fun, actually. So here's my mock-up that I made a while ago. I wanted to keep this add task screen simple, um, and not super overbearing. Just wanted to ask, what would you like to do? When would you like to do it? And I say this will be fun because thinking about implementing this is tricky. I have no idea if date pickers exist in Compose, or if we will have to figure out how to launch the system date picker dialog and then get that response back. I have no idea. We'll figure that out when we get there. But I was also debating, is this full screen? Is this a dialogue? Is it a bottom sheet? What's it actually going to look like? Um, I was thinking in either case, we could sort of build out this is just a column. We could build out like the column of information. Um, and then from there, we can figure out like if we're going to put that inside like a dialogue or something like that. Um, so let's do it. Let's figure out what we want to do. So we made an add task package. Um, let's modify this a little further. Let's do add task UI. Um, and one thing that we're going to need, oh, and let's switch to a new branch for this. Let's figure out, I think we have ticket. All right, we'll throw it in here, number 14. So check out B, we'll do TOA 14, add task UI. Interesting. Why did this file change? I don't know. We're gonna roll that back. Maybe the IDE changed something about this. It did. Hmm, interesting. Must have been something I clicked around. But anyways, let's talk about the UI. So one thing I always like to do first is define the UI state for this, which will be like a data class of whatever the configuration is on this screen, and then our composable can consume that UI data class, that view state class, and then know how to render. Um, but we've also had the debate and discussion on this stream that for view state classes, uh, we had this debate, but I think we decided, and I would like to be consistent, that we were going to use sealed classes for our view states. So this is fine, um, because I think we can make this work. Let's talk through it out loud as we go and see how it looks. So we're going to call this add task view state. Um, and this sealed class, though, does have a few things in it that are basically consistent, whether we're entering data or we're submitting or like there was a failure, right? Like one is like if the inputs are enabled. We saw this on login. This will default to true, but there might be, gotta hydrate. Cheers, Tim. There might be situations where we don't want those inputs to be enabled. Let's say like when I press the submit button while I'm making the request to save the task, I don't want the user interacting with the screen. So we'll have inputs enabled. Um, we're also going to need um, the text values. Like the task, we'll call this the task description. And then we're also going to have, we want to call it the scheduled date. Um, yeah, we could call it that, the scheduled date. Um, so this will have task description, that's the string, will default to empty. Um, we only have the task scheduled date. Now this is a good question. Do we want to, hmm, do we want to use a date time class? Um, or do we want it to just be like a string for now? We do have the Java time library, so we could make it like a zone date time. I guess if we're going with the user's time zone, we would do like local date time, right? And even then, probably local date is what we would want. Um, and we could just default that to like today. Does this not work? Why are you yelling at me? I'm probably missing some, oh, there's a solution to this. Hold on. If you want to use the Java 8 time and libraries, no, you don't need min SDK26. There's actually this like desugaring thing that you can do. Um, Let me find it. Because I do this in the capsule app. Um, I don't think that's it. That's part of it. Um, yeah, so we need to enable core library desugaring, and then we also need this desugar SDK thing. Um, so let's find this. Actually, where does that go? Compile options. Do we have that? We do. So we throw that in there. Core library desugaring enabled, true. But then we do need this dependency for the core library desugaring. Let's just throw that at the bottom. Um, and now if we do a Gradle sync, I should be able to use the Java 8 time libraries. Nice. Okay, so that is the core information. Um, so possible view states or the add task UI. Um, but that's the basics, right? So now we need um, possible implementations, right? So how did we do this? I need to look at the login view state to remember how we did some of this actually. Um, Specifically how we moved. Got it. So when we did the login view state, we had this for each, basically for each version that needed it, we had to override this value so that if I move from, say, input, or oh, we called it active. If I move from, say, active to submitting, I need to pass like the current credentials. So we have a way of doing that. So I guess let's talk about it step by step. So the first time, or as it changes, we're going to be in the active state, right? So we'll call this active. And this would have um, basically the same fields here. Do I need to override? Right? Oh, I had to call this open val. Hold on. Yeah. Uh, I remember this now. So for this one, when I'm creating this, I don't think I want to make those optional, but we will need override, and then we'll also need to make all of these open. so that we can modify them. I don't think I need to worry about that for um, inputs enabled. So when we're active, we're going to give it a description and a schedule date. Okay. Um, uh, words. We're going to have submitting, right? Which would take in the same things, but what this would do is pass those through, but more importantly, inputs enabled would be false for this. Um, we could have. I'm also wondering if we want to like combine these into a shared class. Um, talk about that after. Um, I would make the parent fields protected, and in the children, I would just pass the constructor parameters to the parent constructor. Ah, so okay. So the reason it didn't work that way is because if I want to do that, I can't make this a data class. In order for this to be a data class, it needs to have at least one like val or variable property. And if I want to do that with what's in the parent class, then I need to override it. And we do that so that this will have like the equals method and we can get the comparison inside our tests and all that fun stuff. Thinking about combining these, um, it's probably a good idea because then if I change something about the core inputs on the screen, I won't have to change every single one of these method signatures. Um, kind of the way that in login view state, rather than have email and password, we call them credentials. Um, maybe we could have like some class here, like new task or something, or a regular task entity, because in theory, the task that I'm creating should like be a task entity. So that's something, but we'll come back to that, I think. That'll be a good refactor. But let's go through all our possible situations left. We also still have, I'm gonna kind of copy this one and rename it. So then we could have I guess error. We could call it like submission error. Task input, there you go. Um we could make that in a second. And this will also have error message, which will be a UI, what do I call this? UI text? UI text. Um, I didn't mock up this screen with an error message, but we should handle if there's an error inputting. Um, and then similarly to the other one, we could have like, what do we call it in login? We call it completed. Let's do the same thing here. Let's have completed. Should be an add task view state. So I like what Tim said. Let's create a small little data class. Um, call it task input. So let's do here. We'll do, whoops, nope. Task input. Um, schedule date. And we can put defaults in here, I think. Um, yeah, we'll put defaults in here. So its entity corresponds to the information required when creating a task. Um, uh, actually, wait a minute. I put that in not the package that I wanted to. I want this to go into add task, that domain, that model. So we're just gonna, one of my favorite tricks in Android Studio, if you change the package declaration at the top and then option enter, there's move file to that package. Um, so I don't even have to worry about like changing anything. I can just use the IDE's little hack to move that where I want it to go. Um, okay, so then here, then we could have open val task input. Start with the default. So then here, override val task input, task input. Do the same thing here. Override val task input, task input. Keep it going. See, this would have been a real pain if like I had kept it that way. Okay, so that's our view state. Um, so now given this, we can work on putting in our add task content. So this will be a composable add task content. And it's going to have a couple things. It's going to have our view state, which will be the add task view state. And then this is going to have a couple callbacks, right? So we're going to have, well, what did we do for login content? Actually, were we got it. So in login, we had a listener for email changed and password changed. I thought about making one single lambda that was like on task input changed, but I agree. Like, I don't actually want this to have to manage the task input. So we should have a callback for each thing. So on task description changed. That'll be some callback with a string unit. We'll have on task scheduled date changed. That will be a local date unit. And then we'll have on submit clicked, which will just be like a regular button callback. Um, Now, before we do this, or before we go any further, um, I want to add the compose previews. So, um, but let's talk about previews. So, again, we've done this before, but bearing in mind there's always new people coming around, you may not have seen this. Um, we have this cool double preview annotation in our compose code that basically what that does is like when this builds, we'll see a night mode and a day mode version of this preview. Now this doesn't show anything because we haven't really put anything in here yet, or even in here. Um, but I would like to take this a step further. I would like to show each of our possible add task view states. Now, how do we do that? Great question. We've actually done this if we look at login content. Just to show you it in action before I show you the code. Um, Bear with me while this builds. And I promise, if you've never seen this trick before, you're about to have your mind blown. So this is all of our possible states for the login screen. So we have our night mode for empty. Um, uh, Actually, it's weird this is empty. But here there's no credentials filled in. Here we can see night mode with credentials filled in. This is the loading state. This is like a glimmer of a progress bar in the middle. This is the error state. So you'll see I've got all these previews, night and day mode, for each possible state. I want to set the same thing up for this add task screen. How do you feel about using one class or something that contains all the callbacks? I can imagine on some screens you could have like 10 such callbacks that pollute the constructor. That is a valid question. Um, and we could totally do that. Um, we could totally do that. We could have like a. I mean, when I used recycler views and stuff, I did that all the time. I would make like a task list click listener. It had a function like on task click, on task long clicked. Um, no, that's a really good question, and I don't know why I stopped doing that. Um, I think because I'm so used to seeing other compose examples where there aren't really any compose examples where you do see that. And so I just kind of got used to seeing the individual callbacks. But you're right, that makes a lot of sense, right? It would keep the constructor of these classes a lot cleaner, and make it a lot easier to add some sort of new thing. Um, and it would make it would prevent me having, so if we go down to the preview that I was just talking about, um, where we pass in all these empty lambdas, uh, it would be so much nicer if we could just like pass in like an one parameter. Um, have an interface for those events that the VM implements. Yeah, but then wouldn't you just pass that in interface into your composable? Something to think about. But um, hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I never thought about it that way, but it's something that would make a lot of sense. Um, maybe we can play around with that after we get this screen up and running. But I did want to finish describing how we got all these custom previews to work if no one's ever seen it. So the way it works is we have this annotation that we can use called a preview parameter that takes some like parameter provider, and then this is the type. So this is the login view state. And right, that makes a lot of sense. Um, maybe I'll try that out after we get this working. But then what we have to do is we create this class. We'll call it login view state provider. It implements this preview parameter provider. It has some type, but then basically this is the meat of it. We have something called values, which is a sequence of login view states. And then I call this sequence of, and I give it all of the possible states that we want. And this will generate a composed preview for each one of these. And so that's how I get like the nice running previews of everything. So before I even start implementing the screen, I want to basically do this same, what's the word? Um, yeah, same idea, the same foundation for this add task content before we even get started. Now, I did notice something in the middle of that. Let's just throw this in as a comment so I have it. I noticed that in login view state, we kept like an initial one. Um, and I kind of like the idea. And I think that I might mirror that so that we are required to put a task input, but we could have an initial state, uh, which will be very explicit, uh, that like this is an empty input. And then we can easily run like a check against the initial state in our tests. So with that, um, why are you yelling at me now? Oh, here for completed, we'll also just do an empty input, kind of like we do on the login screen. So let's go back to add task content. So basically, we want to take this concept and mirror that for uh, add task view state provider, preview parameter provider, add task view state. Um, okay, so we can also have like an active input, so we don't have to keep duplicating it. Um, we can put a description will be, I was trying to think of something funny. I got nothing. Buy an NFT. Um, and the scheduled date will be today. Boom. Um, okay, and then here we could say return sequence of. So we'll have add task view state. We'll have our initial. We'll have the active state. Um, we will have submitting with the active input. Um, we'll want submission error message. We could do UI text, that string text. Don't buy NFT. Shut up, Tim. Um, and at that view state that completed. Okay, so we have those. Um, and then here we put that in here. So we do preview parameter, add task view state provider, and then add task view state. Okay, so then here, um, I think we want, how did I do it with login content? Did I put, okay, I just put the theme around it. TOA theme, uh, add task content, view state equals add task view state. Um, yeah, okay. That's what they changed on submit clicked. We'll just throw in some empty lambdas there. All right, so now we have sort of the building blocks to where when we add stuff, we will have a preview for each possible scenario. Um, so let's start with the default. So let's start with just throwing in this this column of information. I'm gonna move this onto my other screen so I have it as a reference. Y'all just saw it and we'll build it out. So let's throw it on the screen and then we'll play around with spacing and stuff to make it look pretty. That's how I like to do compose stuff. So we're gonna have a column. We're gonna have some text. I want to make sure I do the material 3 version. Um, this will say, what would you like to accomplish? Um, we can give this a style. Uh, we'll give it a headline large. I don't know how big that's going to be, but we're going to find out. Um, we're going to have a TOA text field. Text will be view state dot task input dot description. On text changed, we're going to say on task description changed. Label text. I didn't have a label in my mockup. Um, and I'm wondering if we really need it here. Can I pass null? I didn't, oh, okay, I don't think we really need it here. Um, because we kind of have the big question above it, so let's not worry about that. Um, let's do another text. When would you like to do it? Um, style again, material theme dot typography dot headline large. Now this is actually interesting. I'm gonna make this look like a text field to match the mockups, but if this is gonna launch a date picker, we might actually put like something else in it. Um, but let's just satisfy the UI previews for now. Um, and then we're also going to do a primary button. Text will be submit, on click, on submit button clicked, on submit clicked. Okay, so that is our column of stuff. Now, one other thing I'm going to do, that was kind of quick. Let me know if any of you have questions, if you're not super familiar with Compose. Um, But with that, I'm going to show you one of my favorite hacks that I always do and how to make this way more readable. Um, we're going to extract this into its own function, and we're going to call this task description label. And then we're going to extract this into one called task description input. And here we'll call this task date label. And this will be task date input. And this will be submit button. And now this becomes way more readable as we can see in English what is being shown throughout our column. Um, I did notice that this passes in the whole view state. That's what the IDE refactored. We don't need to do that. We're going to have this pass task input dot description. Let's rename this. So this is going to have some text, and we'll rename this to onText changed. And then same thing for the submit button, actually. We're just going to rename this to onClick to be a little more vague, but consistent. And yeah, let's build and refresh, and let's see what that whole preview situation gets us. Probably won't be super pretty, but we'll get us close. It'll probably just end up throwing everything on top of each other, which is more or less what happened. So one thing is we can see right through this. Not great. But I was at the debate, who should be responsible for supplying a background? Should this composable supply it? Or would I assume that this is being displayed on a surface in the first place? Which is usually what I would like to do. But if I want to see that in a preview, I think what I would do is I would just throw a surface inside my preview and then put the code inside there. And let's see what this gives me. Do, do, do. I'm surprised that preview took so long. Maybe it's because there's 10 of them. Okay, better. So now we see our app theme in here. So now we just need to play around with this a little more. Well, how can we do that? Well, one thing, I noticed that my thing doesn't have this. But I want to be able to pass in my own modifier to this. But, okay. So, yeah, it's great if you know it exists. So this is a similar question. I'm like, I know that I want this screen, or I want this content to sort of like fill the biggest possible width. Let me pull up, now that I have copied it over. Let's look at this together. So I'm envisioning this being full screen. But there's a little bit of a question. I'm like, who should have the say in that? Should this content composable right inside here, should I tell my column to fill max size? Or should I say whoever is implementing this composable should pass that in? And I think, possibly controversially, um, that it's really whoever's implementing this composable. Because what if one day I want this add task comment to be shown in a more minimalist example? So I think we're going to do that. I think we're going to not override it ourselves. We'll keep this as is. But there are things that I think the column should be responsible for. Like, I have this designed as center aligned text, so we can do that. we can go into our label and we can go to text align dot center. And we can add this to both of our labels. Um, we have spacing in between everything. Uh, I don't know what I made it. We can make it like 24. That seems like a good spacing thing. And where we could put that is actually right on the column. We could do vertical arrangement. We could do arrangement dot spaced by 24 dips. Do we use that else? Aha! So, well, okay. I noticed we had a dimension here called list padding. Uh, what did we make that dimension? We made that 16. I don't really want to reuse that, um, because I'm not really doing list padding here. But I thought about it because I was thinking that in general I might try to not use this .dp because while it's really great and quick and easy, um, it makes it really hard to look up if I want to change something. So I kind of liked the idea of, extracting this out to like a readable dimension resource that is like form spacing, which you know what? That's a really great name. So why don't we do that? Uh, so anytime we have like some sort of input, we can add form spacing here. Uh, dimension resource r.demand.form spacing. And let's build and refresh and see how this looks. Yeah, because there's so many previews, this does slow it down a little bit. Um, so something to keep in mind. But it's still worth it because the time I waited just there for all that to run was way faster than trying to run 10 different previews. Um, I'm also wondering why. Okay, so it's just my IDE that was cutting off that line. Um, uh, yeah, I'm wondering if we should actually go with a little more than 24. Or, so I had two thoughts here. Um, hmm. So we could increase the spacing, or what I'm really thinking is I think this bottom button should be spaced further away from like the last input. So it's kind of how did I do that here? I guess I didn't. Um, I just feel like the button and the input are too close. Let's try changing this to 48 and let's see how we feel about that. Okay, that's a little better. Now, I think what I was gonna try is what would happen if we kept it at 24, but in between the last input and the button, we did like a vertical spacer with just one other value of form spacing. This might actually give it too much because it's going to do 24 spacer and then another 24. So this is actually going to look probably pretty bad. Um, but let's see. Oh, I guess that doesn't look awful. Um, so again, I guess it's hard to imagine this when it's not inside of like a full screen, but I think this is pretty good for now. Enough to move forward with at least. Okay, so let's commit where we're at because we actually still have more to do with this beginning work on um, add task content. Um, what do I mean by more work? Well, one is we never handled the um, inputs being enabled, right? Um, So let's add that. Um, Pass the film X size to the preview. Yeah, I could do that. I think that's what's going to happen in practice, right? So let's do that. I also might have to rethink this because my root element will not always be a column. But before we run this again, let's also talk about this. So um, with our input, we're going to want enabled, and this will be view state dot inputs enabled. And we're going to want to pass that to the task date input as well, and to the submit button. Uh, Now it's going to yell at me because I haven't implemented that yet. So let's do that. Enabled will be a Boolean, and we'll pass that through. Um, that also goes on the submit button. And the task date input as well. So now if we build and run our preview, um, I'm actually also going to do some padding on this as well. Um, just because I don't want those to always go right up against the edge either. Aha, my commit failed because of some static analysis check. Unused private member. Ah, we can worry about that later. Nice. Okay, this actually looks okay. I mean, I'm not a designer, so I'm not too upset by how this looks. Um, and here's the error state. Now there is no like error UI, um, which we would need to worry about. Uh, but that can come later. Um, or loading state. So let's work on those two things. So for loading state, let's look at how login content handled that. Um, so um, I like this. So, oh, interesting. So for login, hmm, I didn't pass a modifier into login. No, I didn't, but I probably could have. Um, I also made login a surface with background. Should I have done that here? Um, would this be background? I guess it doesn't matter. I guess we can worry about that later. I'm mostly concerned about the organization here. So with login, we made a box. And the reason for the box was that you have your login content always there. And then if you're in the submitting state, we throw this progress bar into the middle of all of it. So I actually want to do this same idea in here. So I'm going to throw this in just as a comment for reference. Uh, so let's do the same idea. I'm going to remove the modifier from the column real quick. And I'm going to highlight all of this and put it in a private function here. Let's call it add task inputs column, similar to what we did with login inputs column. And then we can actually probably just copy this idea. We'll want a box. Here we'll put an add tasks inputs column. This will be a little different. We'll have on task description changed, on submit clicked. This will be add task view state dot submitting, and then do some imports. Um, So I guess actually this works out. We'll just have this consume the same modifier. Um, and then yeah, for what we'll do for the inputs column, we'll do a fill max width. Not size. We'll let the color specify that, but we can definitely say that this column should be as big as its parent, and I think it's fine for us to be a little opinionated about this line right here. Let's refresh these previews. Sorry, that was kind of fast. Let me know if anyone needs me to revisit any of that code. Um, got it. So there's our submitting state, and we can see where the progress bar would be. Okay, so I think that's looking good. Um, I keep thinking about how login wrapped itself in a surface, and now I'm wondering if I want to do that here as well. Um, let's commit this, and let's see how this looks. Um, handling submitting state. This should probably have been empty in that one example, but we'll worry about that later. Um, okay, the push still fails. That's fine. So I'm going to take this box, throw it in there. So then I guess I no longer need my preview to do a surface, just give it the theme. And, ooh, but then the modifier gets applied to the box. Um, should the modifier be applied to the surface instead? I don't know. Um, if you're using a box, do you really need a surface too? The reason I like the surface is because it will do like a local composition of the colors. So by changing this to background, it's going to make everything else use the on background colors for me without me even having to think about that. Um, Prince with the raid, thank you for coming by. I hope your stream was good tonight. Um, Like, so I could put a background modifier right on the box, but then I wouldn't get the benefits of like the color mapping from like the box background to the box text. Um, that's something special that like a surface does for us. Database conflict type issue. Classic, classic. Um, I'm really annoyed that my IDE is making me use this unused private member, so I'm actually going to turn this off because I just don't care. Um, cool. So we handled that. Um, we also need to show like an error state. And I guess there's a couple error states for us to get to. Building an app is so complicated. Um, there's an error idea. You're right. That's another way to think about it is it's the same way as that modifier. Like, should I specify that I'm a surface or should I let the other class do it? And maybe that's better. You're right. Let's get rid of the surface in here. Um, and then, yeah, we can handle that further up the chain. We'll fix the login one later. Um, I'm actually surprised. Are my on surface and background the same color? I didn't think they were, but maybe they are. Um, Interesting. So let's look at the convention we used in the login content for an error. If we did one, which I thought we did. Got it. So we put in the login inputs column, we said, oh, if there's a submission error, we throw a text composable with the message below the password input. I say we do the same thing here. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go in here and right below the date input, I'm going to put submission error and do all this. So that should um, give us what we want. And then we'll get a nice little error message. Uh, Close. Our our error is not center aligned. Um, I think that's because on our column, we want to set horizontal alignment to center. I'm going to do the same on ours. Nice. Okay. So we've got loading content error. We've even got our aha, found a small bug. This is our completed state. The inputs are still enabled here, even though we don't want that to be true. And that was an issue over in where we define the view state. When we define completed, we want to say inputs enabled is false. Um, so now if we re-render these for the completed state, we should see this switch to disabled. Nailed it. Um, cool. That's Did you manage to lift the screen when the keyboard opens? I remember you trying to check that on a previous screen with the login screen. Yeah, I never figured it out. Nope. I gave up. I have not looked at it in a few weeks. I have no interest in it. Um, let's throw this in here. Completing add task content. Um, and I think let's make this a PR by itself. Um, I'm gonna make a PR and then I'll do what I usually do, where I'll clean these up post stream. But let's make a PR, and then we'll go into a new branch, and we can work on navigating to this screen. Actually, that will be cool. So let's go to TOA real quick. We'll have this instead of going into development. Um, Actually, that's where it should go. Um, but I'm gonna chain these for now. So creating add task UI, implement an add task content composable that renders the add task screen. So from here, um, we'll keep with the same ticket, this number 14 for adding a task, and let's implement our view model.